We love teachers. My children have had the best teachers. I've had the greatest teachers that have influenced and impacted me. But there are rogue teachers in America's classrooms right now.
Rogue teachers.
Rogue teachers.
Parents
correct.
send their children to school to be educated, not indoctrinated into ideology.
What ideology are they being indoctrinated into?
Let's just say children in America cannot read.
They often dodged questions with talking points.
You're being evasive.
21% of Hispanic students are reading on grade level.
You're being evasive. What ideology are the children being indoctrinated into? What is your fear?
That was an example of a gotcha journalism moment between 60 Minutes' Scott Pelley and Moms for Liberty founders Tiffany Justice and Tina Descovich. At issue was their contention that children in the public schools are being indoctrinated. Pelley, perhaps genuinely, wanted evidence, which for the unprepared is a challenge to supply in a soundbite, but which I'm going to attempt to provide here. And the place to start is with a definition. What does indoctrination mean? Well, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, it's a process of repeating an idea or belief to someone until they accept it without criticism or question. Is that what's occurring in the public schools? And if it is, how could we show it? We would first need to evaluate the ideas and beliefs that the public school is repeating, and for what purpose. For you see, we agree with Moms for Liberty and many other thoughtful observers of the public schools that indoctrination is the right word to describe what's going on there. More specifically, these ideas and beliefs are presented to children in what we at Protect Our Kids call the triple threat: sex and gender theory, critical race theory, and social emotional learning. In this first of what will be a 3-part series, I'll address the ideas and beliefs that comprise the first leg of this triple threat, sex and gender theory. But before I get to the details, a little background. After all, we didn't get here overnight. The seeds of the harvest we're now experiencing were planted decades ago. The first real evidence of what was coming can be traced back to the turbulent 1960s and the sexual revolution, where almost overnight traditional sexual mores and customs were overthrown. Many social scientists and historians were sounding the alarm about the cultural abandonment of individual restraint and responsibility for what they warned as a worldview of purely personal and sexual fulfillment. Life was suddenly reoriented around catering to one's own psychological or therapeutic needs, to expressing your individualism, whatever the cost, to be what's called your authentic self. And it didn't take long before the consequences of these beliefs began to manifest. Shortly after the sexual revolution came nationwide no-fault divorce, and with it, the demise of the nuclear family. In 1968, adults living with an unmarried partner was very rare, about 0.2% of adults aged 25 to 34. But today, less than 20% of households in the United States consist of a married couple with children, half of what it was in 1970. According to a recent study by UCLA, close to 1 in 3 adolescents today describe themselves as gender nonconforming. According to Abigail Schreier in her book Irreversible Damage, the rates of teen suicide and clinical depression skyrocketed, particularly among young people in the trans community. And the disproportionate rate of mental anguish for the trans-identifying has been seen to persist. And this is true even among the most trans-affirming societies on Earth, like Sweden, where researchers were alarmed to discover that the suicide rate of post-surgical transgender individuals was 19 times the general population. Clearly, something is wrong. But that has not stopped the forces of sex and gender theory from advancing their cause, most aggressively on the minds of children in America's public schools. But what do I mean by the term sex and gender theory? Well, it can be traced to the underlying beliefs of critical theory, which sees morals and human behavior through the lens of power structures and social inequities. To critical theorists, Reproductive biology and the nuclear family are remnants of an oppressive patriarchy that must be overthrown, along with its taboos. The new order centers around expressive sexual individualism. To live our authentic lives, we must break the bounds of biological restrictions and cultural norms, or so sex and gender theory teaches. How did this thinking creep into our nation's schools? For that, we can think a combination of forces, starting with Planned Parenthood, which was founded by the eugenics devotee Margaret Sanger. In 2008, the International Planned Parenthood Foundation published its declaration on what it called sexual rights, which included things like sexual dignity, the advancement of subjective gender identities, lowering the age of sexual consent, and something called comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE. Take note of the word sexuality. It was deliberately chosen. For Planned Parenthood, K-12 sex ed had to go well beyond anatomy and reproductive health education to include sexual expression. A year later, UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, also got on board. It too asserted that teaching about human reproduction, risks, and disease was no longer sufficient, and that schools had to play a prominent role. What is that new role? Well, according to the World Health Organization, sexuality education must now include teaching children about a range of topics, including things like gender identity, sexual orientation, eroticism, pleasure, fantasies, desires, beliefs, attitudes, and even values. In other words, comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE, is about moral reframing. If there was any doubt about this, consider SIECUS, otherwise known as the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States, which, despite its name, is not a government organization. SIECUS's motto, Sex Ed for Social Change. Or Planned Parenthood, which proclaims CSE as gender transformative in support of what it calls, in critical theory parlance, equitable social systems. And then, of course, is the subject of abortion. For if, as Planned Parenthood states, you care about abortion, then you should care about sex education. When you take the time to parse through all these materials, as we at Protect Our Kids have, you quickly discern 4 identifiable goals behind sex and gender theory as implemented through CSE curriculums. Number 1, to deny biological reality. 2, to sexualize children, and at the earliest possible age. 3, advance subjective sexual orientations and gender identities, what's called SOGI. And 4, to undermine what sex and gender theorists consider the oppressive nature of the nuclear family, meaning a married male and female who reproduce and raise children. With that background, let's look now at how sex and gender theory, or comprehensive sexuality education, plays itself out in our nation's schools. For these examples, I'm going to look mostly to California, since it's been in the vanguard of advancing these beliefs, but citizens of other jurisdictions should take no comfort, as CSE is also mandatory in other states, like Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and Illinois, and it also exists in some form across the country. But in California, where CSE was signed into law in 2015, the Department of Education published a 700-page document that is known as the Framework, and that's available online, setting forth what the state's schools are required to teach to its over 6 million students. In California, CSE is required in middle and high schools, but highly encouraged in elementary schools, and many elementary schools have indeed adopted it. In fact, starting in pre-K, through illustrated books like Who Are You?, My Princess Boy, and Jacob's New Dress, children are taught that biology and gender are unconnected realities, and that your reproductive organs have nothing to do with your gender. In California's framework-endorsed Who Are You?, The Kid's Guide to Gender Identity, children just barely learning how to read are told that babies can't talk, so grown-ups make a guess by looking at their bodies. Children are taught that there are more than two genders and instructed to become versant with words like trans, genderqueer, non-binary, third gender, two spirits, and other sex and gender theory terms. Another California framework suggested resource for CSC instruction is 10,000 Dresses. It's about a boy who dreams of and fulfills his desire to dress like a girl. Or My Princess Boy, with a similar plot line, in which the California Department of Education advises conserved to help children challenge gender stereotypes. When you open the book, children read, I love my princess boy. When we go shopping, he is happiest when looking at girls' clothes. And when they laugh at him, it hurts us both. The message being, accept him for who he is. And if you don't, well, that's obviously your problem. Mind you, these books are meant for 4- and 5-year-olds. Moving up the grades, from 4th to 6th grade, the materials become more emphatic in their messaging, with titles like Uncle Bobby's Wedding, King and King, and It's Perfectly Normal. At this point also, the Genderbread Person is a recommended teaching tool, which presents gender identity, expression, and attraction as existing along a spectrum, all of which are meant to be explored. But at least in the Genderbread Person, biological sex is still mentioned. In the picture book, It's Not the Stork, here we start to see graphical depictions of full frontal nudity and descriptions of sexual organs. In Sex, Puberty, and All That Stuff, children aged 5 to 8 years old are advised by the California framework to be shown graphical images of simulated sexual organs, encouragement to masturbate, and engage in foreplay. But as the book also gratuitously advises, don't feel you have to have oral sex if you don't want to. Not everybody enjoys it, and that's fine. As suggested by the framework, this book is also intended for classroom chat discussions facilitated by an adult teacher. By the time children turn 9, they're deemed wise enough to begin learning about gender transitioning and given online resources to further explore. Teachers are instructed to normalize all sexual feelings, including masturbation, gender roles, and gender expression. They're also instructed to teach children not just to tolerate, but to positively affirm diverse sexual orientations, with examples, along with the harms of what California Department of Ed calls negative gender stereotypes. At this age also, the subject of sexual consent is further introduced. In fact, sexual consent is meant to be taught at all ages and stages, even prebescent. Content props are advised for use on playgrounds as well as in the classroom. Children are guided into sexual consent discussions with questions like, how can I start a conversation with my partner about sex, desires, boundaries, and protection? What are some body cues that my partner is enjoying themselves or is uncomfortable? Notice we haven't gotten to middle and high school yet. In California, in addition to the framework, most CSC curriculums are guided by what's called the Adolescent Sexual Health Work Group, or ASHWAG. Most of the materials I will highlight are endorsed by this group. Some of the more popular curriculums are from publications like Teen Talk, Rights, Respect, Responsibility, and Be Real, Be Ready. These all come from the activist group Advocates for Youth, whose tagline is Young, Powerful, Taking Over. Their goal, as stated on their website, and is typical critical theory language, is inextricably tied to social justice and the fight for liberation. In middle school, the genderbread person is replaced now with the gender unicorn, where biology isn't even mentioned, but rather referred to as sex assigned at birth, meaning it's a purely arbitrary distinction. Many other tools are employed to convey the same message, like this one from Cardia Services, one of the nation's largest suppliers of school curriculums. Here's another one from Cardia. This one focused on gender inclusivity, where students are guided in an exercise to identify their own gender identity, including preferred pronouns, how they want to be seen, and what they like to wear, and even their favorite toys and games. Here's a class exercise from the Lake Tahoe Unified School District asking students to describe their identity labels, values, and if they think it's important that others share those values. At this stage also, it's assumed that students are sexually active and that acceptance of non-monogamy is inclusive and a moral good. To cement the orthodoxy of sexual inclusiveness, students are taught that religious-based gender roles should be seen as what the framework labels spiritual abuse, so that if a parent, pastor, or other trusted adult resists the new orthodoxy, they should be seen as engaging in abuse that may be reportable. By high school, sexual body part contacts that were until very recently considered unhealthful and even scandalous are now actually encouraged by state officials. Students are guided to brainstorm about the types of sex that are included in the definition of sex, including oral and anal. In the Be Real, Be Ready curriculum, the fact that anal sex does not come with the risk of pregnancy is actually presented as a fun fact. In a lesson plan from Rights, Respect, Responsibility, students are taught how to construct dental dams to protect against STDs when having oral or anal sex. Teachers are instructed to tell students the dental dams are flavored because they are designed specifically for safer oral sex. This same curriculum tells students that body parts are not relevant to one's gender identity. Advocates for Use, Be Real, Be Ready curricula encourages teachers to engage in open dialogue with their young charges about sexual pleasure and to provide tools to help facilitate these discussions. Mind you, all of this happens behind classroom doors. Again, sexual consent for minors of all ages is explained as a fundamental right. Teachers are also advised to invite in representatives from Planned Parenthood and the ACLU to help students identify and become comfortable with off-campus sexual health providers, whether to treat STDs, have an abortion, or to enter into what's now called gender-affirming care, meaning a medical regimen of puberty blockers, followed by cross-sex hormones, and eventually body mutilation surgery. Now, of course, teachers themselves require training before they jump into this material, and they certainly get it, sometimes whether they want it or not. The following slides are from materials presented to teachers in the San Diego Unified School District, starting with a video being shown to a teacher that is meant for young children.
What if you were born with a penis and you know you're a girl inside, not a boy?
Then your sex and your gender don't match.
Wait, what does know you're a girl inside mean anyway? Does that mean you have to love pink things and princesses?
Nope. Sometimes people refer to things as girl things and boy things, but this is just how people sometimes classify things, usually to make it easier to sell stuff to kids and their parents. Clothes, toys, and games are for everyone. You don't have to be a boy or a girl to like a certain thing. Sid, has anyone ever told you that you shouldn't play with something or wear something because you're a boy?
Well, yes.
The body parts you were born with don't always dictate who you are, how you feel, or what you like to play with.
Ah, that's such a relief.
Gender, how you feel and who you know yourself to be, tells you who you are, and there are a whole bunch of possibilities. Figuring out what feels right for you is just part of growing up. Bye, little cutie.
You might want to change that diaper sooner than later.
All right. So let's expand our vocabulary or understanding other identities, and in this case, non-binary. So let's first just look at the general definition. Non-binary is an adjective describing a person who does not identify.
Their role, not as a sex ed teacher in a biology class, but as a sexuality educator, is explained to them. Teachers are told about how to encourage and facilitate kids coming out and about campus safe spaces for LGBTQ+ students. The so-called pillars of heteronormativity are explained to them, of course, in pejorative terms. The old notions of man, woman, masculine, feminine, sex with the opposite gender, and the nuclear family are meant to be distinguished as outdated and even hateful. Teachers are told that male-female relations are part of an outdated model of privilege and institutional power that must be challenged and done away with. They're coached to brainstorm on how to make their classrooms more inclusive to non-heterosexual predispositions and philosophies. One way is to celebrate International Pronoun Day, meaning a child's preferred gender pronouns. Of course, teachers are expected to practice themselves the use of gender-neutral terms in the classroom. Instead of sister or brother, they're coached to use the term sibling. Instead of male and female, use the term human. Instead of Mr., Miss, or Mrs., use MX or mix. Teachers are instructed to kids dealing with gender dysphoria, an emotional state that until very recently was considered a psychological malady, but which now teachers are coached to affirm as healthy and desirable. They're even trained in how to openly discuss questions from children on sexual self-stimulation and asked, how could you make your response inclusive to all students? Sexuality educators in San Diego are even trained to be able to answer the question, what does semen taste like? As for teachers who resist this pedagogy, well, they are dealt with. But of course, at the same time, all such instruction is hidden from prying eyes, and especially from parents. Teachers are told that neither parents nor administrators are allowed to observe what goes on behind closed classroom doors. A child's gender identity, expression, sexual orientation, even pregnancy are to be kept in strict confidence, and especially from parents. The students themselves are encouraged to decide how much of their sexual lives they want revealed to their parents, if any. In many schools, 2 sets of records are kept, one for the school staff and students, the other for parents. Many, if not the majority of school districts in California have what are called gender identity student support plans, like this one in the Santa Ana Unified School District. These are also called parent exclusion policies and are the subject of several pending lawsuits throughout the nation. Unless you think these policies only exist in California, think again. Because our friends at Parents Defending Education have found such policies in over 1,100 school districts and counting across the nation. Such policies are buttressed by an array of state and federal laws designed to destroy traditional notions of sexual propriety and to make way for an era as audacious as it is uncertain. This list is just a sampling going back 25 years, again, mostly from California, because it has led the way in this sexually brave new world. 32 years ago, the LGBT activist Paula Edelbrook was very clear about the goal of sex and gender theory that we see in schools today. Being queer, she asserted, is more than setting up house, sleeping with a person of the same gender, and seeking state approval for doing so. Being queer means pushing the parameters of sex, sexuality, and family, and in the process, transforming the very fabric of society. Today, in the nation's public schools, not a month goes by that kids aren't asked to celebrate and take part in what has been arguably the most successive cultural transformation in Western history. a transformation led mainly by the public schools and hidden from the eyes of parents. Is what's happening in California and other state schools indoctrination? The process of repeating an idea or belief to someone until they accept it without criticism or question? You can be the judge. I'm Mark Schneider for Protect Our Kids.